My name is Joshua. I grew up playing JRPGs like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Kingdom Hearts, and many others. And I've always had a strong desire to create. Ever since I was a kid, I was passionate about writing my own stories and drawing, making music, and eventually I became obsessed with the idea that one day I would make my own game. And this is the story of how almost 20 years later, I'm finally doing it. Back when I was 13 years old, in 2008, my PS2 broke down and I was almost forced to live in the real world without video games. This was around the peak of my preteen obsession with Final Fantasies and RPGs in general, so I remember going to the cyber cafe and desperately typing juegos gratis, free games, looking for anything I could put on my flash drive and bring back home to play on our very old family PC. I don't remember exactly what I searched for, but somehow I ended up discovering one little game that would end up changing my life. It was called Lost Scenario, and somehow it felt just like the JRPGs I played on my PS2. So much so that I initially thought this was some older game developed by Square. So I played the hell out of it. There was only one problem. I barely spoke any English at the time, so I made up half the plot in my mind while using a dictionary to try to make sense of the other half. Looking back, it's kind of funny to think about how different that experience was from playing a game today. I wasn't just playing the game and following the story. I was basically filling in the gaps myself. There were characters and conversations I didn't understand, places whose names meant nothing to me, and probably entire parts of the story that I completely misunderstood. And somehow, I loved it anyways. Many years later, that game is still very special to me and I've played it multiple times. Eventually, I found out that this game hadn't actually been made by some forgotten Squaresoft team. It had been made by just one person using a piece of software called RPG Maker. And that was basically the end of me. I wasted no time downloading it as well. It was a pirated fan translation of RPG Maker XP in terribly broken Spanish, but to a socially awkward 13 years old who loved fantasy worlds and loved creating things, it was basically everything I could have asked for. I spent that year making dozens of games. Most of them either ended up corrupted because of some stupid mistake I had made, or had to be deleted because we only had 8 gigabytes of hard drive space on that PC, and it would get full just by looking at it. Still, I loved creating. I didn't really know what I was doing either. I was just discovering that I could put a character on a map, give him some dialogue, create a little town, make a monster appear in the forest, and suddenly there was a world that hadn't existed before. That was incredibly exciting to me. Back then I also had a very clear career plan. Eventually some Square Enix employee would discover one of my games, realize I was a genius, and offer me a job as a director of the next Final Fantasy. I had it all figured out. Unfortunately, none of the games I've made during that period have survived. My story with RPG Maker didn't end there though. Over the following years, I kept coming back to it. I'd get completely obsessed with some new project, spent a few months developing it, and then either lose interest or catastrophically lose everything because whatever second or third hand cheap laptop I was using eventually decided it had suffered enough. Of all those projects, only one has survived because I uploaded it to a forum to get feedback on it. Looking at it now, it's really terrible, but it had a ton of heart. And I think that's probably what I remember most fondly about those old projects. They were terrible, but they were mine. My last attempt at making a serious project was in 2016, And after losing a ton of hard work, I never tried using the engine again. I also became an adult, and my 20s turned out to be a very busy decade. But I always had this idea in the back of my mind that eventually I would return to RPG Maker and at least finish one project. Not necessarily because I thought it would become some huge success, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could actually do it. Then, during my summer holidays last year, I was bored at home one day and thought to myself, what the hell, let's just download the newest one and make a few maps, for old time's sake, and maybe see how much RPG Maker has improved in those 9 years. I only planned to play around with it for a couple of days, but slowly the passion came back. It felt surprisingly similar to how it had felt when I was 13, except now I had a ton of experience with the software, and RPG Maker MZ makes it so much easier. I could do things in a few minutes that used to take me hours, and I suddenly had a much better understanding of what I was actually trying to achieve when I was making something. And the desire to create my own JRPG, to have something of my own to really focus on, came back stronger than ever. And at this time, instead of making another project that would eventually disappear into some forgotten hard drive, I decided I was actually going to make the game I'd wanted to make for all these years. Okay, you keep talking about your life, but what's the game you're actually making? Well, for about a year now, I've been slowly developing this world. I wanted to start on a smaller scale, because I know from experience how quickly these projects can spin out of control. If I give myself too much freedom, suddenly I'm making a game with 3 continents, 12 kingdoms, a 500-year political history. So this time I decided to make something smaller and more enclosed. Meet Elian, a boy living in Alder Hollow, a small town surrounded by a deep forest filled with mysteries. The town itself is actually a very important part of the game. I don't want it to feel like the place where the player happens to start before leaving for the real adventure. Alder Hollow has its own history, its own little traditions, its own folklore and superstitions, and most importantly, its own relationship with the forest. The people who live there have spent generations learning to be cautious around it. There are things they don't talk about, places children aren't supposed to go to, old stories that have been repeated so many times that nobody's quite sure anymore where they came from. And the adults have grown accustomed to living that way. The children haven't. That's where Elian and Cliff come in. At its core, I'm trying to capture that sense of wonder, adventure, and exploration that children have, and that I think eventually gets lost as we grow older. As an adult, I've realized that I either know, or at least have a pretty good idea of how things work and what to expect from any given place or situation. Even when something seems strange, my first instinct is actually to rationalize it. Nothing feels really unknown anymore. And I think that's something I miss about being a kid. When I was a kid, I had a friend in my neighborhood who was always making things up and taking me to explore places, going on these little adventures around our city. It was usually some completely ordinary place near his house, but I didn't know the neighborhood, so everything felt distant and adventurous to a 7-year-old Joshua. A patch of trees could become a forest, an abandoned building could become a ruin, a road I'd never walked down could lead to absolutely anywhere. Obviously, none of those places were actually mysterious, they were just places I hadn't seen before. But when you're 7 years old, you don't know that yet. And looking back, I think that feeling is one of the things that I've been trying to recreate. That eventually became the basic idea for this game. 2 boys, Elian and Cliff, exploring the forest beyond their small village and discovering its ancient ruins and secrets, all while sneaking out of town and trying not to get caught by the adults who are mostly interested in preserving the life they've built for themselves. I drew a lot of inspiration from the first few hours of Dragon Quest VII. I played the PS1 version, where it takes a surprisingly long time to unravel the mystery of the ruins and the strange state of their little island. The more recent versions jump much more quickly into the bigger adventure, but I love the slow build-up of the original. You spend a long time just living in this strange little world, talking to people, exploring places that seem completely ordinary, and gradually realizing that there's something much bigger going on underneath it all. I loved that feeling. I want to capture it and expand it beyond just the first couple of hours, hopefully for the entire length of the game. I'm also trying really hard to make Alder Hollow feel like a lived-in world, with an actual culture, folklore, and superstitions belonging to the people who live there. I don't want the villagers to just know that the forest is dangerous, because the game needs them to say that. I want there to be reasons for the things they believe, even if those reasons have been distorted or forgotten over generations. Every fear an adult holds, every strange creature in the forest, every unexplained event, and every story about someone getting lost out there should feel like it had been built on years and years of legends and things the townspeople have told each other. And I think that's where the game starts becoming more interesting than simply two kids exploring a mysterious forest, because Elian and Cliff are going into a place that the adults already have an entire history of beliefs about. They just don't know which parts are true, and neither does the player. But we'll talk more about that in some other video. For now, this is the game I'm working on. Roots of the Forgotten.